Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Welcome to my channel. My name is Ogbanje Joseph. Please subscribe to this channel, share, like, as well as drop a comment on the comment section. So, our lecture today is titled, the reforms, the call for the reforms of the Security Council of the United Nations Organization. The call for the reforms of the Security Council of the United Nations Organization. So now the Security Council, okay, the Security Council is made up of 15 member states. Okay, now five are permanent, and which countries make up the five countries that are permanent? We have the US, Russia, UK, France, and China, and 10 elected for a term of 2 years. Any of the permanent members could veto any bill found detrimental to its welfare. What are the functions of the Security Council? The functions of the Security Council are as follows. Number one, maintaining peace and security among the nations of the world. Number two, it also investigates any situation that may bring about danger and recommend measures for restoring peace. Number three, when persuasion to settle any dispute fails, the Council, through Article 7, may order military action, to which member nations is expected to send troops. Now let us look at the reason for the call of the reform of the Security Council. What are the reasons? Number one, the challenge of conformity. Now sometimes these permanent members of the Security Council have violated the UN decisions in the bid of persuading, of pursuing foreign policies and achieving their national interest. This has knocked out the UN in the area of conflict prevention. For instance, the case of the US invasion of Iraq was against the UN desire. Okay, so the challenge of conformity is actually one of the reasons for the call for reformation of the UN Security Council, or of the UN in general. Number two, inadequate representation of states. Okay, now the same five countries, that is US, Britain, Russia, China, and France, have been the power player since 1945. So the inequality of representation in the UN Security Council has made few nations more powerful than the other majority members of the 198 countries. Okay, number three, inability to prevent wars. Okay, the UN was established to prevent wars and ensure member states abide by the principle of peaceful means of settling disputes. However, unfortunately, the international system has experienced various wars, conflicts, uprisings, and terrorism, which has claimed millions of lives and endangered peace and security around the world. To that extent, the Security Council has not actually done, has not really done, performed her function. So another reason why, or another reason a lot of people are actually calling for the reform of the Security Council is the overbearing attitude of the big five. Okay, now these big five actually assume the primary responsibility in maintaining international peace and security. Now it determines whether a situation constitutes a threat to peace, breach of peace, or aggression. However, it did not determine the aggression when Iraq invaded Kuwait. So when their national interest is actually involved, they become biased about the issue, which is actually one of the reasons why a lot of people are actually calling for the reform of the UN, or the UN Security Council. Then number 5 is lack of adherence to the judgment of the International Court of Justice. Now, the decision of the ICJ are sometimes weakened by the big five. Okay, example is the judgment of the case between the U.S. and Guantanamo Bay. Another case between Britain and Argentina over Falkland Island are good examples of where, okay, these big five have actually violated, okay, the judgment of International Court of Justice. So these are the reasons, for the call for reforms in the United Nations, okay, particularly the Security Council, which is actually the major, the engine house of the United Nations organization. So although the UN, is the most important international political organization of its kind, its achievement is, in maintaining peace have been widely criticized, and voices calling for reform have never ceased, to be heard. The rationale for the reform, are those things, I talked about above. Now, what are the reform proposals? What are the proposals that have been put across, for the UN Security Council to be reformed? Number 1 is further democratization of the United Nations Security Council, formal democratization of the UN Security Council. Okay. Number 2, each continent should be represented in the Security Council, particularly, the permanent members. Each continent has to be represented. As it is right now, we have Russia, we have Europe having 3 countries represented: Britain, France, and Russia. We have America represented with 1. We have Asia represented with 1, which is China. But Africa is not represented. Okay, the Middle East is not actually represented. So all of this must actually be put into consideration. Okay, then number 3, the devaluation of the powers of the big five by either abolishing the veto powers or curtailing its use. Okay, now the veto power has to be abolished. It has to be abolished. Now, what are the problems? Let us look at the problems. The reasons this reform may never see the light of the day are as follows. Number 1, inability to reach a consensus on the use of veto power. For instance, states have not decided on the issue of whether or not to remove the veto power of the members of the Security Council. So that is actually number 1 of the problems. The reforms may never see the light of the day. The second problem, or the second reason why the reform may never see the light of the day, is how to pick those to represent the favored continent. So if you say Africa as a continent should be represented, who are they going to choose? Which country are they going to choose? Is it South Africa? Is it Ghana? Is it Nigeria? Now, these 3 countries I've mentioned have their own advantages, okay, have their own strengths and weak points. So which one of them are they going to choose at the end of the day? That is one of the reasons, the reform may never see the light of the day. We also have Middle East, we also have the Caribbean, and all of that are also fighting which country should be chosen or which country should not be chosen. Then we have another point, which is the opinion on whether or not its General Assembly, it is opinion on whether or not it is General Assembly or the Security Council who should have more powers is still divided. Okay, there is no consensus on which organ, okay, of the United Nations that should have more powers between General Assembly and the Security Council. Okay, so that is actually a very big reason why the reform may never see the light of the day. Number four, the issue of funding. Okay, the people actually, the West are calling on the South, calling for reforms to be prepared to fund, their call for the reforms. Now, for the international organization, that is for the UN, to be properly reformed, all must have equal contribution that will be fair. Otherwise, those who are the major financiers will hijack the organization. That is actually another argument, and this argument is actually very strong. Okay, all of these arguments, while the reason for the reform may never see the light of the day, they are actually very strong. However, the call is still very much alive. A lot of people are still making that call. Okay, so the Security Council, the United Nations, must actually listen to those voices. Thank you very much.